You feel it long before you admit it. That quiet, heavy moment when you finally understand that no one is coming. No rescuers, no guiding hand, no voice to lift you from the mud. Only the echo of your own breath and the distant murmur of a world that doesn't even know you're struggling. This is the first crossing. The instant a man realizes that the weight he carries is his alone, it doesn't feel heroic. It feels like dusk settling on the road, erasing the warmth behind you and revealing a long stretch of silence ahead. A silence that exposes every weakness you've tried to hide. Musashi felt this truth as a boy. He walked out of his village with nothing but a wooden sword and a decision to stand alone, without lineage, without protection, without applause. He wasn't chasing glory. He was escaping the suffocation of a life where he had no room to become what he sensed inside himself. The villagers thought he was reckless, but he was simply listening to the whisper that comes to every man once in his lifetime. Leave now, before you forget who you could be. Ancient warriors knew what modern men avoid. They sought solitude not because they were exiled, but because silence is a forge. When the world is loud, a man can pretend. When he is alone, he cannot. Today, men fear being alone because solitude strips away the illusions they built to survive. But Musashi understood the opposite. The road with no footprints is the only one where you discover whether you are moving forward or merely being carried by others. And so you stand at the edge of your own dusk, staring at a path that leads into nothingness. Yet in that nothingness lies the first truth of strength, the self. You meet when no one else is watching. You already know what it feels like to think differently, to see what others ignore, to hold standards that make people uncomfortable. This is the strange burden of the man who steps ahead of the tribe. He isn't trying to lead. He's simply walking at a pace the others refuse to match. But the distance grows, step by step, until he turns around and realizes he's alone in ancient times. The strongest walked ahead to test the unknown: cliffs, storms, predators, darkness. Their solitude wasn't rebellion. It was responsibility. Today, that same spirit survives in men who refuse mediocrity. But instead of wolves or mountains, they face something quieter, a society that mocks discipline and praises indulgence. The more serious you become about your path, the more others will pretend you're strange for even caring. Musashi felt this weight deeply. Schools invited him, alliances sought him, but he refused them all, not out of arrogance, but clarity. He learned early that groups are built to protect the average from the demands of greatness. He chose to walk ahead, knowing that the air becomes colder where few dare to tread. Modern solitude has its own sting. You become isolated not because you lack people, but because the people around you do not share your hunger. They want comfort. You want purpose. They chase distraction. You chase mastery. And the gap widens. Picture a torchbearer walking into a cave. His light pushes the darkness back, but the deeper he goes, the more he understands. Light has no companionship. It illuminates, but it does not cling. This is the paradox of the strong man's journey. The more you grow, the fewer can walk beside you. And so you continue forward, carrying both the burden and the dignity of the path, knowing that someone must step first into the unknown. Even if no one follows. There comes a moment when the noise fades, not because the world becomes quiet, but because you stop performing for it. In that pause, something shifts inside you. You begin to see your own thoughts without filters, without the need for approval, without the background hum of judgment. This is where solitude changes shape. It stops being emptiness and becomes expansion. Every ancient tradition understood this. Monks retreated to mountains. Hermits vanished into forests. Warriors spent nights alone before battle, staring into the dark to confront the enemy within. They weren't escaping the world. They were meeting themselves in a place where distractions couldn't interfere. Modern men struggle with this, Because the world has made escape easier than confrontation. A phone can numb the ache. A screen can bury the doubt. But silence exposes everything you've avoided, and in that exposure lies power. Musashi's greatest insights came from this space. His revelation of two heavens as one, the unity of strategy and spirit, didn't erupt in crowds or tournaments. It bloomed in isolation, in the long, unspoken hours, where he sharpened his perception as relentlessly as his blade. Mastery is not born in noise. It grows in the quiet soil no one else notices. Imagine a blade heated in seclusion, glowing in the dimness. No applause, no witnesses, only the steady rhythm of steel meeting steel as invisible hands shape it stroke by stroke. That blade is you. Your solitude is the fire. Your discipline is the hammer. Every hour spent alone is another strike, forging your edge. In a world obsessed with constant connection, the man who embraces solitude becomes rare and dangerous. Because while others lose themselves in noise, you are learning to hear the deeper voice, the one that only speaks when everything else falls silent. And once you hear it, you never mistake the world's distractions for your own purpose again. There is a quiet freedom few men ever taste. It begins the moment you stop seeking emotional shelter in others. Not because you hate people, but because you no longer lean on them to hold together the parts of you that should have been forged internally. This is the strange gift of walking alone, the realization that your peace cannot be taken, because it was never borrowed. Mentally strong men don't choose solitude out of bitterness. They choose it because dependency has a price, a subtle surrender of identity. Ancient warriors trained themselves to detach from comfort so they wouldn't fear losing what the world could take. A man who is owned by nothing cannot be broken by anything. Today, people cling to relationships not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of silence, fear of emptiness, fear of meeting the unguarded version of themselves. But strong men walk into that silence willingly, not because it is pleasant, but because it is truthful. And truth, however cold, is where real strength is born. Musashi embodied this with a calm that unsettled even his rivals. Praise meant nothing to him. Admiration never swayed him. Belonging didn't tempt him. He didn't reject connection. He simply refused to need it. His foundation was internal, his direction self-chosen, his loyalty reserved for the path, not the crowd. Picture a mountain standing through seasons, wind, rain, snow, sun. It does not chase affection. It does not beg for shelter. Yet those who approach it with respect find shade, protection, and perspective. That is the paradox of emotional self-sufficiency. When you no longer need anyone, you finally become someone worth seeking. There is a bitter sweetness to this freedom. It carries a certain loneliness, yes, but it also carries an indestructible calm, the kind that can only be forged when a man stops running from himself and learns to stand alone without trembling. Strength has a price, and it is always paid in private. Walking alone means walking without applause, without validation, without the gentle reassurance that someone sees your effort and approves. The world rewards conformity. It punishes independence with silence, but silence is where the unshakable man is formed. You already know this cost. The long nights where decisions fall solely on your shoulders. The uncertainty that swallows you when there is no counsel, no comfort, no confirmation. You make the call. You bear the consequences. And while others sleep peacefully, you lie awake wrestling battles no one will ever know you fought. This has always been the curse of those who carry inner strength. In ancient times, leaders and warriors spent nights by the fire, staring into the dark while others rested. Their minds navigated valleys of doubt and peaks of fear. They walked into danger first, shielding the tribe from unseen threats. Greatness has always demanded a kind of solitude that ordinary men cannot withstand. Musashi lived this reality with a severity that bordered on destiny. His duels were fought alone, his training done alone, his victories celebrated in silence. He walked away from every battlefield with the same expression, calm, unadorned, untouched by pride, because real triumph is not loud. It is a quiet meal, eaten at an empty table after a long battle, where the only witness is your own exhaustion. Picture that scene. A warrior sitting alone, armor loosened, the echoes of combat fading into the night. Food before him, quiet around him. No celebration, no crowd, just the weight of survival settling into his bones. This is what people never see, that strength isolates, and isolation purifies. When you choose to be unshakable, you choose the path of the few. You choose the nights without reassurance. You choose the loneliness of conviction. And though the world may never understand the wars you've fought, something inside you hardens, sharpens, steadies, until you no longer seek applause to validate your journey. The cost is high, but so is the man who pays it. There is a turning point in every solitary path, a moment when isolation stops feeling like exile and starts becoming elevation, when the quiet that once stung now feels like clarity settling over the mind. You rise above the noise, not by escaping the world, but by no longer being entangled in it. The higher a man climbs, the fewer remain beside him, not because he pushed them away, but because the terrain itself thins the crowd. People who once understood you now struggle to recognize your priorities. They call you distant, distracted, detached, never realizing that you are simply focused. Vision has a way of making you look far away to those who stay close to the ground. Ancient wisdom expressed this simply: the summit has no crowd, only clouds and clarity. Those who reach it stand alone, not because they wanted solitude, but because they endured what others could not. Musashi reached this summit during his mountain retreat, while writing the Book of Five Rings. Removed from society, he didn't lose himself. He found the vantage point from which he could finally see the shape of strategy, mastery, and life itself. His solitude became insight. His distance became precision. His silence became instruction. You begin to feel the same shift. What once felt like loneliness becomes a kind of inner altitude. You see people differently. You see choices differently. You see yourself differently. Not with arrogance, but with a quiet understanding of why you walk the path you do. Picture standing on a cliff at dawn. The world below is still wrapped in sleep. But up here, the air is sharp, and the horizon glows with the first light. You can see the entire landscape, valleys, roads, storms forming far away. This is the gift of solitude, vision, the ability to perceive what others cannot, because they have never climbed high enough to see it. And with that vision comes a calm acceptance. You no longer resent walking alone. You understand that clarity has always lived above the crowd. There is a moment, usually unexpected, when you meet another man who carries the same silence you do. You don't recognize it through words, or posture, or achievements. You recognize it in the way he looks at the world, steady, unhurried, unbothered by noise. This is the quiet brotherhood of lone wolves. A bond formed not through closeness, but through shared solitude. Strong men do not travel in packs, yet they are never truly alone. Across continents and centuries, warriors who walked different paths carried the same inner stillness. They shared a spirit shaped by isolation, responsibility, and discipline. They could have lived entire lives without meeting, yet they would have understood each other instantly. Modern society misunderstands these men. They are not antisocial. They are selective. They do not avoid people. They avoid dilution. They avoid the shallow conversations that weaken their edges. They avoid the crowds that demand conformity. What they seek is resonance, the rare presence of someone who has also carried himself through darkness without breaking. Musashi knew this paradox well. He walked alone, yet he produced students in his later years. Not many, but a few who saw the world with similar eyes. He did not chase followers. He simply lived his truth so completely that others found themselves illuminated by it. Solitude became mentorship. Independence became guidance. Imagine wolves scattered across a vast forest, unseen by one another, yet all howling to the same moon. They are apart, yet connected by a force deeper than proximity. This is the silent bond of strong men, a brotherhood not built through gathering, but through enduring. Walking alone does not end in isolation. It ends in clarity. The man who has spent enough time in solitude returns to the world changed, not colder, but sharper. He sees through noise, through illusions, through the subtle games people play to avoid themselves. His gaze becomes steady, not because he is disinterested, but because he is no longer deceived. Ancient wisdom teaches that a man does not stay on the mountain forever. He retreats to refine himself, then returns to serve with a cleaner mind. The purpose of solitude is not escape, it is purification. When a mentally strong man steps back into the world, he isn't seeking belonging, he is carrying purpose. His presence changes rooms more than any speech could. Musashi's entire legacy is proof of this. He walked alone, not to vanish, but to understand. And when he emerged, he shaped generations, warriors, artists, strategists, thinkers. His solitude was not isolation. It was preparation. The world remembers him not because he sought attention, but because he sought truth. Picture a man stepping out of a silent forest at dusk. In his hand, a flame he protected through storms, winds, and nights without warmth. The world may not understand where he has been, but they feel the steadiness of the fire he brings. A fire no storm can extinguish. This is what happens to you as well. The solitude you've endured, the distance you've taken, the silence you've carried, it all becomes a kind of internal armor, a light that does not flicker with the world's instability. You return not as someone who needs acceptance, but as someone who brings perspective. And so the path ends where it began, with you, standing alone, not out of necessity, but by choice, not as a wanderer, but as a man who finally understands that the quiet road is where the strongest version of you was waiting all along.